The kidneys. The kidneys are the most important organs inside our body that are responsible for the maintenance of homeostasis. So homeostasis is the state in which a body functions at its optimal level. That means there is an equilibrium in the production of enzymes, there is the optimal working, and there's an optimal coordination between different organs and different enzymes and the brain and whatever hormones that are produced inside our body. So we can say that the most important the three important things that the kidney does for our body is that it brings about the water control, it brings about the endocrine functions, it controls the endocrinal functions, and also is responsible for the production of erythropoietin. And erythropoietin, as we all know, is responsible for the maintenance and the making and the production of red blood cells. But most importantly, we can see that it's involved in the maintenance of the levels of calcium, which it does by the production of renin. Renin helps to produce a specific enzyme known as hydroxycalciferol, and we need hydroxycalciferol for calcium metabolism inside our body. So, that was basically all of the functional aspect of the kidney, but we are more concerned about the anatomy of the kidney. So it's important to take a look at it on a more anatomical view and see how does it look like. So if you look at a typical fresh kidney, you can see that it is reddish brown, bean shaped, and is retroperitoneal. Now, I would like to take a moment to actually explain what retroperitoneal means in detail. So, mostly organs, so for example, this is a typical organ. It's not the kidney, but a typical organ. It is situated behind the abdominal cavity, and it is behind the abdomen. This is the anterior abdominal wall, and it is attached to the posterior. So this is the posterior abdominal wall. It is attached to the posterior abdominal wall by the means of certain entities. So we can say that it is attached to the abdominal wall by the means of a mesentery. So that's the mesentery. So we can say that these organs are intraperitoneal or behind the peritoneum and are covered by the peritoneum. However, retroperitoneal organs are organs that are situated behind the abdominal cavity, in front of behind the peritoneum, but do not really have a mesentery. And organs that fall into this category include the pancreas. Then we have the kidneys, we have the ureters. Sometimes we have the ovaries too. So there's a list of organs that we're going to be looking at later, but just keep in mind the perfect definition, the right definition for a retroperitoneal organ. Now, moving forward, we can see that it's located, as you can see, that it's in close vicinity. It's in close vicinity to the ribs, as we can see the ribs, and then we have the lumbar vertebrae here. So if we're going to pinpoint the exact location, we can say that it's located approximately near the upper portion of the 12th rib and the third lumbar vertebrae. Now, although we can see that there is a difference between the right and the left kidney, the right being much more lower due to the presence of the liver, and the left being more medial being it's more closer to the vertebral column, and it's much more longer as you can see. There's a lot more difference, but approximately the sizes are the same. The length being 11 centimeter, transversely the width being 6 centimeter, and then the thickness being approximately 3 centimeter anterior posteriorly. The kidney is different, as I said before. The left kidney is plus 1.5 centimeter. That means it's much more longer, 1.5 centimeter longer than the previous one. The weight also differs. So, for example, we have the weight being 150 grams in the case of males, and in the case of females being 130 grams. The kidneys. The kidneys are the most important organs inside our body that are responsible for the maintenance of homeostasis. So homeostasis is the state in which a body functions at its optimal level. That means there is an equilibrium in the production of enzymes, there is the optimal working, and there's an optimal coordination between different organs and different enzymes and the brain and whatever hormones that are produced inside our body. So we can say that the most important the three important things that the kidney does for our body is that it brings about the water control, it brings about the endocrine functions, it controls the endocrinal functions, and also is responsible for the production of erythropoietin. And erythropoietin, as we all know, is responsible for the maintenance and the making and the production of red blood cells. But most importantly, we can see that it's involved in the maintenance of the levels of calcium, which it does by the production of renin. Renin helps to produce a specific enzyme known as hydroxycalciferol, and we need hydroxycalciferol for calcium metabolism inside our body. So, that was basically all of the functional aspect of the kidney, but we are more concerned about the anatomy of the kidney. So it's important to take a look at it on a more anatomical view and see how does it look like. So if you look at a typical fresh kidney, you can see that it is reddish brown, bean shaped, and is retroperitoneal. Now I would like to take a moment to actually explain what retroperitoneal means in detail. So mostly organs, so for example, this is a typical organ. It's not the kidney, but a typical organ. It is situated behind the abdominal cavity, and it is behind the abdomen. This is the anterior abdominal wall, and it is attached to the posterior. So this is the posterior abdominal wall. It is attached to the posterior abdominal wall by the means of certain entities. So we can say that it is attached to the abdominal wall by the means of a mesentery. So that's the mesentery. So we can say that these organs are intraperitoneal or behind the peritoneum and are covered by the peritoneum. However, retroperitoneal organs are organs that are situated behind the abdominal cavity in front of behind the peritoneum, but do not really have a mesentery. And organs that fall into this category include the pancreas. Then we have the kidneys, we have the ureters. Sometimes we have the ovaries too. So there's a list of organs that we're going to be looking at later, but just keep in mind the perfect definition, the right definition for a retroperitoneal organ. Now, moving forward, we can see that it's located, as you can see, that it's in close vicinity. It's in close vicinity to the ribs, as we can see the ribs, and then we have the lumbar vertebrae here. So if we're going to pinpoint the exact location, we can say that it's located approximately near the upper portion of the 12th rib and the third lumbar vertebrae. Now, although we can see that there is a difference between the right and the left kidney, the right being much more lower due to the presence of the liver, and the left being more medial, medial being it's more closer to the vertebral column, and it's much more longer as you can see. There's a lot more difference, but approximately the sizes are the same. The length being 11 centimeter, transversely the width being 6 centimeter, and then the thickness being approximately 3 centimeter anterior-posteriorly. The kidney is different, as I said before. The left kidney is plus 1.5 centimeter. That means it's much more longer, 1.5 centimeter longer than the previous one. The weight also differs. So, for example, we have the weight being 150 grams in the case of males, and in the case of females being 130 grams. So that's the kidney, and that's a suprarenal gland that's found on top of the kidney. But then we can also see some fat that surrounds the kidney, especially in the hilum and especially around the kidney. So that's the perirenal fat, and this fat is the main way in which there are blood vessels that are supplied to the kidney. But there's also another entity known as the perirenal fascia that surrounds most of the kidney. Now, this perirenal fascia is basically much more thicker on the borders or the poles of the kidney and also at the hilum of the kidney. Now, and I'm gonna be more specific while considering where and how does this fascia surround the kidney, because of course the fascia is very specific. So it surrounds and fuses with the quadratus lumborum, and then we have the psoas muscles. So it is in intimate relation with these two muscles, and it fuses with them at some point. And we're going to be looking at them in much more detail in the atlas. But there's another thing that we need to keep in mind. We know that kidney is retroperitoneal. That means it is behind and it is covered by the peritoneum on the anterior side, of course. But it also, the fascia of the kidney fuses with the parietal parietal peritoneum. Now, you might be quite confused right now because most of the organs that we studied earlier and most of the organs of the abdominal region are mostly covered by the visceral peritoneum rather than the parietal peritoneum. Now, let us discuss more into detail how this can happen. So, for example, this is a diagram which I want you to sort of understand properly. As you can see, this organ right here is intraperitoneal and this organ right here is peritoneal. So I'm just going to draw the same diagram here so that you can understand it much more properly. So if you're going to consider an intraperitoneal organ, so for example, that's an intraperitoneal organ, it is attached to the posterior abdominal wall. So that's the posterior abdominal wall with the help of something known as the mesentery. Now, the mesentery is something that attaches like a rope, but it does not really happen in the case of something that is retroperitoneal. So that's the retroperitoneal organ. It does not really have a mesentery. So how is there an attachment or in relation with the peritoneum? So, for example, this is the peritoneum. The outer layer of the peritoneum is known as the parietal peritoneum. It goes like this, it goes here, it goes, and it sort of forms something like this. And at a certain point, it becomes the visceral peritoneum, where it folds and it goes and it goes and it just covers the interperitoneal organs, and then it goes and it fuses with the parietal peritoneum at a certain point. It is also one of the major components of the mesentery. As you can see here, it does not really have any contact with the retroperitoneal organ that we see. The most intimate contact that we can see with the retroperitoneal organ is with this parietal peritoneum. So in this way, we can say that the retroperitoneal organ are anteriorly covered by the parietal peritoneum. Here in the atlas, you can observe how is there a relation of the kidney with the quadratus lumborum. So this right here is the quadratus lumborum, and that is the, no, sorry, I think it's the opposite. So that's the quadratus lumborum, and right here, the long one, is the psoas major. Let us look at the relations of the kidney. So we know that there are two kidneys in the body. So we have the left and the right kidney. But first, let us look at what is the common relation for both of these organs, for both of the structures. So we have the common relations that include the psoas major, quadratus lumborum, diaphragm, and the arcuate ligaments of diaphragm. Then we have the subcostal vessels, the iliohypogastric and the ilioinguinal veins. And lastly, we have the ribs, namely the 11th and the 12th ribs, the costodiaphragmatic recesses. So we're going to be looking at the structures that we discussed earlier here. So that's a diaphragm, which is one of the major relation, and then we can see that we have medially the arcuate ligaments of the diaphragm. So arcuate ligaments, this is the medial arcuate ligament right here, and then we have the lateral arcuate ligament. So it forms an arc right here. So that's the arcuate ligament of the diaphragm. Then we have the quadratus lumborum. That's the quadratus lumborum. That is posteriorly, most of the posterior relation is the quadratus lumborum. And then we also have the psoas major muscle. That's also one of the posterior relation. Then we can see that there is the emergence of the subcostal veins. So as you can see, these veins right here are known, and the veins and the arteries, basically the subcostal vessels, are one of the major relations, are the posterior lateral relation of the kidneys. Then, that being said, there's also the relation posterolaterally with the kidney, with the vessels here. So we have the nerve, which is this nerve right here. So that's the iliohypogastric, and then we have the ilioinguinal, I guess that's the ilioinguinal nerve. So iliohypogastric and ilioinguinal nerve are the posterior relations. And lastly, we can see that there is the presence of ribs. So if I'm gonna switch on the structure right here, you can see that we have the 11th and the 12th rib, which are not really in a direct relation because, of course, they're obturated by, they're obscured by the diaphragm. But however, they are a relation of the kidney posteriorly. So 11th and the 12th rib. We also have the lumbar vertebrae too. But there's another thing to consider is the recess. So we have the pleura of the lungs that is somewhere here, and it forms the costodiaphragmatic recess that is also in a close relation, maybe posteriorly near the inferior pole of the kidney. Let's take a look at the relations of the right kidney. But before we saw the relations of both of the kidneys in general, but there are certain relations that are very specific to each kidney. So the right kidney, it includes superiorly, we can see that there's a suprarenal gland. Then medially, there is the peritoneum. Right below it, we have the peritoneum that separates its relation with the right lobe of the liver. Then we have the descending part of the duodenum, that's retroperitoneal, and it's in close contact with the medial area of the right kidney. Then lastly, we have the colic flexure that makes up the inferior relation of the kidney. So that's the kidney right there. And those are the relations of the kidney. So as you can see that the right lobe, the first we have the adrenal glands, then the right lobe, and then we have the duodenal flexure, and lastly the colic flexure, the duodenum and the colic flexure. Okay, so I'm just gonna make it come here a bit. Yeah, there you go. The kidney, the suprarenal gland, which includes the duodenum, the colic flexure, and the lobe of the liver. Let's take a look at the relations of the left kidney now. It includes, firstly, the suprarenal glands, superiorly and anteriorly, and then we have the spleen with a layer of peritoneum separating them. Then we have the pancreas and the splenic veins on the medial side of the left kidney. Then we have the stomach, which is also separated with the layer of peritoneum. And lastly, we have the colic flexure, especially the splenic flexure of the colon, with the jejunal folds, of course, the jejunum of the small intestinal tract. Lastly, it's also important to know that posteriorly we have no relations because, of course, kidneys are one of the most posterior and most organs, and posteriorly we just have fat, so just a renal. So let us see at the relations of the kidney posteriorly, because of course anteriorly is not really visible. So let us see the left kidney right here and relations of the left kidney posteriorly. So posteriorly, as I mentioned before, superiorly we have the suprarenal gland, then medially we have the pancreas, and of course the vessels of the spleen. Laterally we have superlaterally just a small portion with the spleen, and then in between them we have the peritoneum. Anteriorly, we can find the descending part of the duodenum, of course, one part of the duodenum right here, this one, and last part of the duodenum. And then we have the stomach, which is separated, of course, with peritoneum. And then lastly, we have the jejunum. This is the jejunum, and then also laterally, we have the colic flexure. Posteriorly, there's nothing, just the fat. The internal structure of the kidney. The internal structure of the kidney consists of the outer layer of the capsule. Now, this capsule is made up of connective tissues, which can be in the form of elastin, or smooth muscle cells, or collagen. Now, inner to that, we have the internal medulla. So that's the internal medulla, and then we have the outer cortex. Now, let us take a look internally what the medulla is consisting of. The medulla is consisting of the renal pyramids. So, as I said, renal pyramids, so they're pyramidal in shape. And the outer side of this thing is known as the base. So it has a base, which is the peripheral region. Then it has an apex that is the inner region that projects inside the renal sinus. Now, what is the renal sinus? So the renal sinus is this area of the So basically, it's this small area that you can see, which is projecting towards the medial side of the kidney. So that's the renal sinus, and internally at this side, the entire renal pyramid becomes a renal papilla. That being said, the anterior compartment, the anterior or the outer portion of this is known as the cortex. So the thing we have over here is known as the cortex. And let us see how the cortex is placed along the renal pyramids and the renal medulla. So the cortex has an outer subscapular region. Why subscapular? Capsular, not subcapsular region. So subcapsular being just below the capsule. So this is the capsule, and below it we have the subcapsular region. So this is the subcapsular cortex. Now, another thing that we can observe is that it projects inside, it projects in between the renal pyramids, forming the renal canals, known as the renal canals. Then we have the medullary rays that are basically the projection that come off of near the peripheral region or the near the peripheral region of the renal pyramids that make up the medullary rays. Then if you look closely, if you take a cross section of the cortex, so for example, I'm going to take this part of the cortex out, I'm just going to observe it under the microscope, I will see that it looks something like this. So that's the capsule. And beneath the capsule, we can see that there is a differentiated layer of the cortex known as the subcapsular zone of the cortex. And then below the subcapsular zone, we have the juxtamedullary zone. And this one is the one that is closer near the medulla. So it's somewhere here. Now, another thing we can notice is that between this zone, so between this zone in this region, you can find the presence of arcuate arteries and veins that supply blood to the entire kidney. Lastly, we can observe that all the apices of the renal pyramids, they form papillae, and these papillae, they make renal calyces. Now, renal calyces are basically the convergence of papillae and the end part of the renal columns. And these renal calyces converge and they empty into the renal pelvis. Now, as you can see, the renal pelvis is the structure that goes inside the hilum of the kidney, and it is present in both of the kidneys, the right and the left. It is also noteworthy to say that there is a presence of fat. So there is a lot of fat that surrounds this structure, which makes it very difficult for surgeons to cut through the renal pelvis. But it's quite an important thing to do because whenever there is a surgery that requires a removal of kidney stones, there is a absolute need to cut through the renal pelvis. The arterial supply to the kidney is mostly done with the help of two major arteries, the left and the right renal arteries. The renal arteries branch off of the abdominal aorta approximately at the level of just inferiorly to the superior mesenteric. So this is the celiac trunk right here. So this is the celiac trunk, and then inferiorly we have the superior mesenteric, and inferior to that we have the two branches of the renal arteries coming off. So renal arteries, let us see. For example, that is the renal artery. And coming off of the renal artery, we have several different branches. As you can see in this image right here, there's this one branch, and then there are these small branches here. But let us see how they are divided. So for example, this is the renal artery. Coming off of it, we have the inferior suprarenal artery. So the inferior suprarenal artery is going to be supplying the suprarenal glands. For example, this is a suprarenal gland, and it's going to be supplying the suprarenal gland right there. And then we have another branch known as a uteric branch that's going to be supplying the ureters. Then there are also more other branches that we can see. So there's going to be the perinephric branches. That's going to be supplying the tissues that are found around the kidney. Then we have the branch that supplies the renal capsule, and then we have the branch that supplies the renal pelvis. That being said, this is a big artery. This is the major artery, so you can see it's much more thick. It divides, so at its distal end, at this end of this artery, there are a lot more divisions that are inside the parenchyma or the parenchyma of the entire kidney. So let us take a further look into these. So the renal artery, this renal artery follows a very unique pattern. So for example, it goes into the segmental artery. So basically, renal artery first forms the segmental artery. Then the segmental artery forms the lobar artery. The lobar forms the interlobar, which forms the arcuate, and which lastly differentiates into the afferent and the efferent glomerular arteries. Now, how does it work? Let us look into each one of these divisions individually. So, a kidney like that, so that's the kidney, the right kidney, it's divided into a lot of segments, as you can observe here. So there can be an apical segment, there can be a superior segment, middle, inferior, etc., etc. Now I'm going to show you how there is a division. So for example, that is the kidney right there. So that's the kidney right there. And there is the segmental artery that goes and enters the hilum of the kidney. So why am I calling it a segmental artery? This is because it enters one of the segments. So it can enter the medial segment, or it can enter the superior segment, or the medial segment, or it can go inferiorly or posteriorly. But in this case, let us take for an example, like it enters the medial segment. Here, at this particular point, at this small point where it meets the apex of the renal pyramid, it divides into the lobar artery. Then there's also two more divisions right at this point, or namely the interlobar arteries. So one goes into the renal pyramid right here, and the other it goes laterally into the renal canal. And then there is further division on the distal end of the interlobar arteries, and this division is known as the arcuate division. So that's the arcuate division right there, which goes and projects at an angle that's about 90 degrees. So there's a 90-degree angle at which there is a projection and the formation of these arcuate arteries. Now, let us zoom in to a small section right here. And if you zoom in, you can observe that this right here, this is the interlobar artery. And coming off of the interlobar arteries laterally, we can find that there are certain small vessels known as the afferent and the efferent glomerular arteries. So the afferent and the efferent glomerular arteries are the ones that are going to be coming off of the interlobar arteries. Let us take a look at the glomerular arteries. So of course we have the afferent and the afferent glomerular arteries. And these glomerular, for example, these are the glomerular arteries. They come together and they form a kind of a plexus of arterioles, which are known as the peritubular capillary plexus. So as you can see right here, this is the peritubular capillary plexus. And this plexus is, now let us look at the end of the arteriole. So that was the end of the arterioles. Let us go at the venous drainage of the kidneys. Now, arterioles and arteries, the arterial supply end, it ends at the arteriole, the formation of the plexus that we saw earlier. But at the end of the arterial supply, we have the starting of the venous supply. So this entire peritubular area of the arterial supply, it converges in such a way that it forms capillaries that are going to be forming the venous peritubular counterpart of this entire plexus. So this is known as the peritubular veins, and they all converge together to form the interlobar vein. Now, after the interlobar, there is the drainage into the stellar veins or the stellate veins. Then all of these join together to drain into the vasa recta. So the vasa recta also comes in and supplies its blood that is to be joined into the IVC, inferior vena cava. Then the vasa recta and all of the other veins that we saw before, they converge into the arcuate arteries, or arcuate veins, sorry. And then lastly, we have the interlobar veins, which goes and drains into the renal vein. So as you can see, it follows a kind of a similar pattern as we saw earlier in the arterial counterpart of the supply. But in the case of the arterial supply, it's basically going from up down. Here we're gonna go the reverse way. That is from down up. That is from the peritubular to the heart. We had firstly in the case of arteries, we had it from the heart to the peritubular arterioles. But in the case of veins, we have it from the peritubular to the heart. So we're going to be following a reverse pattern. So the peritubular comes first, of course, and then we have the interlobar, then we have the stellate, then we have the arcuate then we have the interlobar again, and lastly we have the renal vein that goes and drains into the IVC and which goes into the heart.